My sister called me at midnight, her voice jagged with forced tears. "Mom died last night," she sobbed into the phone. "The funeral is this Friday. She left every single thing to me, so do not even bother coming back to Philadelphia. You get absolutely nothing." I held the phone away from my ear and just smiled. Why? Because my mother was standing right next to me in my kitchen, sipping her morning tea and looking very much alive. My name is Kayla. At 34 years old, I make my living as a high-stakes insurance investigator. I've seen every scam in the book, but I never expected my own sister to try and file a death certificate for a woman who is still breathing. Ashley thought she was closing a deal. She did not realize she was just opening a case file. What would you do if you found out your own family was organizing a funeral for you while you were still alive? Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not even ask Ashley how it supposedly happened. I just hung up. In my world, anger is not a loud, crashing wave. It is clinical. It is a quiet hum in the background of a forensic audit. At 12:03 a.m., while Ashley was busy practicing her fake mourning in Philadelphia, I was sitting in my silent office in New York, opening my laptop. My mother, Jennifer, watched me with a look of pure confusion, her tea still steaming in her hand. I held a finger to my lips, signaling for her to stay quiet. She did not know yet that her own flesh and blood had just declared her legally deceased to the world. She did not know that to the state of Pennsylvania, she was now just a collection of assets waiting to be liquidated. I logged into my specialized investigation portal. As a senior insurance investigator, I spend my days finding people who burn their own warehouses for the payout. My sister did not realize that she was not just lying to me. She was entering a battlefield where I held every piece of heavy artillery. I started with her social media. Ashley had been busy. Within 10 minutes of calling me, she had posted a black and white photo of our mother with a heart-wrenching caption about sudden loss and heaven gaining an angel. Below the photo was a link to the Jennifer Memorial Fund on a popular crowdfunding site. The goal was set to $150,000 for unforeseen medical expenses and a celebration of life. I ran a quick trace on the payout account linked to that fund. It did not take long. Ashley, a real estate agent who had not closed a sale in 14 months, was desperate. The money was not going to a funeral home. It was being routed directly into a private credit union account used to pay off a high-interest store card debt at Neiman Marcus. She was not grieving, she was shopping. But that was just the appetizer. The main course was the property. I pulled the public records for the family penthouse in Philadelphia. This was not just a home. It was a $5 million legacy my grandfather had secured decades ago. I saw it immediately. A notice of intent to sell had been filed less than 4 hours ago. Ashley and her husband, Matthew, were moving with a speed that suggested this was not an impulsive lie. This was a planned heist. They were organizing a fake funeral to explain Mom's disappearance, while they stripped her life of its value. Matthew had already contacted a luxury liquidator to evaluate the antique furniture. My compassion for them had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years. Now, I realized my version of family had been a subscription service, and I was finally hitting the cancel button. Inside the dim light of my office, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. Ashley thought she was burying our mother. She did not realize she was just digging a hole for herself, and I was going to make sure it was deep enough that she would never see the light of day again. I looked at my mother, her hand trembling slightly as she set her teacup down on the glass table. The piece of our hidden penthouse in New York felt fragile now, haunted by the digital ghost of the sister I had just cut off. For 5 years, I had been the silent investor in their twisted version of a family. I had been the one who calculated the risk, paid the property taxes when they were on the edge of foreclosure, and settled the credit card debts that Ashley racked up like she was playing with Monopoly money. I recalled the night of Ashley's 30th birthday party. I had just wired $20,000 to Matthew to keep his creditors from knocking down their door. I stood in the corner of that Philadelphia ballroom, watching them toast to their success with champagne I had effectively bought. Ashley had laughed into her glass, telling a circle of her polished friends that I was the family embarrassment, the cold, detached black sheep who only cared about spreadsheets and audits. I did not correct her. I just checked my phone to confirm the transfer had cleared. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and they were finally over the limit. People often look at someone in my position and wonder why I stayed silent for so long. They see a cage without bars and assume I was choosing the confinement. I call it the invisible chains of a survivor. In a toxic family, silence is not just compliance. It is a tactical maneuver. It is a specialized form of survival where you learn to make yourself invisible while you gather enough resources to build a life they can never reach. I was not being a doormat. I was building an arsenal. My endurance was not a sign of weakness. It was a long-term investment in my own eventual liberation. The tremor in my mother's hand grew more pronounced as she watched the live stream on my laptop. She saw her favorite daughter dabbing fake tears with a lace handkerchief, telling the world that Jennifer was gone. She heard the lies about her own supposed dementia and the immediate need for a $150,000 funeral fund. The light of realization was finally breaking through decades of maternal denial. She was not just sad. She was seeing the monster she had raised for the very first time. She said, "I was dead, Kayla," my mother whispered, her voice like cracking glass. "She is selling my life while I am still standing here." I took her hand, my grip firm and cold. "This is not a family anymore, Mom. It's a balance sheet. And they are currently in the red." I closed the laptop, the screen reflecting my own clinical gaze. The time for silent investment was over. The audit had begun, and I was going to make sure every single debt was paid back in full, starting with the reputation they were trying to bury. I watched Ashley's face on the screen, a performance that would have won an award if it were not so nauseating. She sat there in a black veil, her voice hushed and trembling, as she described our mother's peaceful end to her followers. She was begging for $150,000 to settle medical debts that never existed, claiming the weight of the tragedy was more than she could bear alone. While the comments section filled with prayers from grieving neighbors, my monitors showed a different reality. Matthew had just used a portion of the incoming donations to make a down payment on a luxury watch and pay off a gambling debt. I began to analyze why they felt so comfortable doing this, and it came down to a psychological phenomenon I have seen in every major fraud case: the trap of cruel normalization. When a family operates on a currency of greed for too long, cruelty stops being a choice and becomes a habit. They are not shocked by their own behavior because they have spent years small-stepping their way across the line of human decency. To Ashley, this was not a crime. It was just the next logical business move to maintain her lifestyle. She had normalized the idea that Mom was just an asset to be liquidated. But I do not operate on feelings or family loyalty anymore. I operate on evidence. I pulled the digital copy of the death certificate Ashley had used to trigger the estate sale. It was signed by a Dr. Sterling, no relation to Matthew, at 3:00 a.m. last Friday. I did not need to interview him to know he was lying. I checked his professional credit card activity through my industry database. At the exact moment he supposedly pronounced my mother dead in Philadelphia, he was swiping his card for a $5,000 buy-in at a high-stakes poker table in Atlantic City. The doctor was not just incompetent, he was a hired accomplice. He had provided the legal cover for a murder on paper in exchange for a weekend of gambling, never suspecting that a forensic investigator was already tracking his every move. This was no longer just a family dispute about an inheritance. It was a multi-layered criminal conspiracy involving insurance fraud and forgery. I saved the transaction records and the time-stamped casino footage I had secured. Ashley thought she was a master of manipulation, but she was playing a game she did not understand. She was building her empire on a foundation of fake tears, while I was building her prison on a foundation of verifiable facts. I was not just looking for the truth anymore, I was looking for the kill shot. And as I watched the donations continue to pour into her account, I knew exactly when and where to pull the trigger. I kept digging into the financial architecture of their lies. It was a skyscraper built on sand, and I was about to kick out the foundation. By Thursday afternoon, I had uncovered the black heart of Ashley's plan. It was not just about a few $1,000s in credit card debt. I found a document filed 3 weeks ago that made my blood run cold. A reverse mortgage application for $900,000 against my mother's penthouse. The application included a medical affidavit claiming my mother was in the final stages of a cognitive collapse and could no longer manage her affairs. But the most damning part was the signature at the bottom. To a bank clerk, it looked like a shaky, elderly hand. To me, it was a crime scene. I ran the digital scan through my forensic software, comparing it to my mother's real signatures from the last 20 years. The pressure points were all wrong. It was not just a forgery, it was a physical violation. I checked the GPS logs from the private clinic where Ashley had taken Mom for a routine checkup that same day. My mother had been administered a massive dose of a fast-acting sedative under the guise of an allergy shot. They had used her own body while she was unconscious, pressing her thumb against the digital scanner to authorize the $900,000 payout. It was passive euthanasia for profit, and they had executed it with the precision of a corporate takeover. But as I pulled at that thread, another secret unraveled. I ran a deep background check on Ashley's birth records, looking for anything she might have used to bypass my own rights as the eldest daughter. I expected to find a hidden power of attorney. What I found instead was a legal void. I discovered a set of sealed adoption papers from a county courthouse in upstate New York, dated 36 years ago. Ashley was not my biological sister. My mother had taken her in after a tragic accident involving a family friend and had raised her as her own, never telling a soul to protect Ashley from the pain of her past. Ashley had discovered the truth months ago and used it as a weapon. She had hidden her status to claim a direct blood inheritance while simultaneously erasing the one person who had actually given her a life. She had spent years preaching about family loyalty and the importance of blood, all while knowing she shared none of ours. She was not just an ungrateful daughter. She was a stranger who had infiltrated our home to strip it bare. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. She had used a family-first narrative to justify my exclusion, while being the only one at that table who was not actually family. Every boundary of human decency had been shattered. They had drugged my mother, forged her identity, and were now holding a funeral for a living woman to hide the evidence of their theft. This was not a family drama anymore. It was a criminal enterprise. And as I closed the folder on the adoption records, I knew that any remaining path to redemption for Ashley was officially closed. The audit was complete. It was time for the execution of judgment. The interior of the cathedral was a study in manufactured grief. Ashley had spent $15,000 on white lilies that filled the air with a cloying, heavy scent. She stood at the pulpit, a vision of tragic elegance in her designer black veil. Every eye in the room was fixed on her as she dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her voice trembling into the microphone. She was telling a story about our mother's supposed final words, a fictional narrative where Jennifer had begged her to take the house and keep the family together. It was a flawless performance, calculated to cement her status as the grieving heir in front of Philadelphia's most influential circles. I stood in the heavy oak vestibule, watching her through the crack in the doors. It was exactly 11:15 a.m. The timing was tactical, not emotional. I was not there to mourn a woman who was currently standing right behind me. I was there to audit a crime in progress. Beside me, my mother smoothed the lapel of her tailored red suit. She looked like a 60-year-old resurrection, her spine straight and her eyes burning with a clarity that no sedative could ever dampen again. Behind us, 2 federal agents stood in the shadows, their presence the final entry in my balance sheet of retribution. I signaled the ushers to open the doors. The sound of the hinges groaning cut through Ashley's speech like a gunshot. The sunlight from the street flooded the dim sanctuary, blinding the congregation for a split second. I did not creep in. I walked down the center aisle with the relentless pacing of a woman who had already seen the end of the movie. Click, click, click. My heels on the marble floor sounded like a countdown. The murmurs started at the back and rippled forward like a wave. People dropped their prayer books. Heads snapped around. Ashley stopped mid-sentence, her hand frozen over her heart. As we reached the front row, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a skyscraper collapses. My mother stepped into the light, bypassing the golden urn that Ashley had filled with play sand. She did not say a word. She just looked at Ashley, her gaze a silent, lethal indictment. Ashley did not faint gracefully. She stumbled back against the altar, her face turning a sickly shade of gray that the veil could not hide. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at our mother, then at me, then at the federal agents who had now stepped into the light. The black veil of her mourning was finally torn away, revealing nothing but the raw, naked terror of a con artist who had run out of lies. The eulogy was a nice touch, Ashley, I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the cathedral. But we found your plan B. I stepped up to the pulpit, moving my sister aside like she was a piece of discarded scenery. I pulled my phone from my pocket and connected it to the church's high-end audio system. I did not need to shout. I let the numbers and the recordings do the screaming for me. The speakers crackled for a second, and then Matthew's voice filled the room. It was not the voice of a grieving son-in-law. It was a cold, clinical recording of him discussing the liquidation of the mother-in-law's antiques and the $900,000 reverse mortgage payout. He talked about the online pharmacy in Mexico and how they would switch the medications once they got mom back to the house to make the paper death a reality. The congregation gasped as one. The socialites who had just been handing Ashley tissues were now recoiling in horror. Matthew, who had been sitting in the front row, tried to bolt for the side exit, but the federal agents were faster. They tackled him in front of the baptismal font, the sound of handcuffs clicking echoing through the rafters. I looked back at Ashley, who was now crumpled on the floor at our mother's feet. She was reaching for the hem of that red suit, her fingers trembling, finally begging for a mercy she had never shown. I did not feel pity. I did not feel anger. I felt the satisfaction of a ledger that had finally been balanced. I looked at the crowd, then at the empty urn, and finally at the woman who had actually raised me. The audit was over. The execution of judgment was complete. The sirens outside the cathedral were the final note in the symphony of their downfall. I watched as they led Ashley away in handcuffs, her designer heels clicking one last time on the marble steps, but this time with the rhythm of a prisoner. Matthew was already in the back of a separate cruiser, his face buried in his hands, finally realizing that no amount of smooth talking could erase a federal paper trail. They were not shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing the part of the invisible investor. The legal aftermath was swift and absolute. Because the signatures were forged while my mother was sedated, the $900,000 reverse mortgage was declared void. The $150,000 they had swindled from the community through their fake memorial fund was seized and returned to every donor. It turns out that when you try to audit the life of a forensic investigator, the numbers always come back to haunt you. But as the dust settled, I realized that true justice is not just about a prison sentence. It is about what you do with the ruins left behind. People call it the justice of the seed sower. Most people think revenge is a scorched earth policy. You burn everything down until nothing remains. But I chose a different path. I did not want to just destroy their world. I wanted to build a fortress for the people they tried to discard. I used my own resources and the restored equity of the penthouse to establish the Jennifer Foundation. It is a nonprofit dedicated to providing forensic legal protection and medical advocacy for the elderly. We specialize in catching the predators who hide within families, the ones who think that age makes a person an asset to be stripped. I am no longer the silent investor in someone else's dysfunction. I am the architect of a new legacy. 6 months after the funeral that never was, I sat on the balcony of the Philadelphia penthouse with my mother. The morning air was crisp and the city hummed below us, but the noise did not reach our sanctuary. Jennifer looked at the thriving garden she had replanted herself, her hands steady as she pruned a row of white roses. The tremors were a memory, the sedatives were a ghost. She was no longer a victim on a balance sheet. She was a woman who had reclaimed her own life. I opened my laptop one last time and pulled up the master file I had kept for years. It was a comprehensive list of every debt, every insult, and every cent I had spent to keep Ashley and Matthew afloat. I stared at the numbers for a long minute, feeling the weight of them leave my chest. I did not feel hate. I did not feel regret. I simply felt the clarity of a finished audit. I hit the delete key and watched the file vanish forever. That night, for the first time in my adult life, I slept through until the morning. No guilt, no noise, just the peace that comes from knowing the ledger is finally balanced. I had spent 34 years trying to earn a place at a table that was designed to exclude me. Now, I have built my own table, and I am very particular about who gets a seat. Justice has been served in a way no one expected. If you found this story valuable, please share it to protect the mothers and fathers around you from similar depths of greed. Do not forget to hit like and subscribe to see my next Journeys for Justice,